The evening air at Lourdes carried the familiar scent of candle wax and mountain mist as 30,000 pilgrims gathered for what seemed like another ordinary night of prayer. September 17th, 2025 began like countless evenings before. Rosaries clicking, voices rising, flickering flames casting shadows against the stone. Yet beneath the routine, something extraordinary stirred. Hospital volunteers pushed wheelchairs over cobblestones while choirs practiced softly and elderly couples lit candles with trembling hands. In the third row before the grotto sat 62-year-old widow, Marie-Claire Dubois. For 15 years, rheumatoid arthritis had twisted her joints and chained her to a cane. Each day was a battle of pills and restless nights, her independence eroded by pain. She had come to Lourdes more out of habit than expectation. As the joyful mysteries began, warmth spread through her hands cold for years with poor circulation. This was no sting of inflammation, but a gentle fire that loosened her joints as though invisible shackles fell away. Tears streamed as she joined her hands in prayer for the first time in a decade. Gasps spread when she dropped her cane, stood unaided, and walked toward the grotto with steady steps. "Merci, Notre Dame," she whispered, pressing her hands to the cold rock where Bernadette once knelt. Among the witnesses was Dr. Philippe Martin, the Paris rheumatologist who had diagnosed her with irreversible arthritis. He had watched her struggle with a spoon that very morning. Now, with a Belgian colleague, he examined her at the grotto. No swelling, no pain, full mobility. "In 40 years of practice," he later admitted, "I have never seen such a sudden and complete reversal. Medicine has no category for what happened." Word of her healing spread quickly, but the night was not done. In another part of the crowd, 12-year-old Pierre Moreau, battling leukemia, walked with his parents in the torchlight procession. Pale but determined, he carried his own candle. "I want to walk on my own tonight," he told them. "The Lady will give me strength." As the hymn Ave Maria rose, a golden glow appeared above the basilica, pulsing like a heartbeat. Sister Marie-Thérèse, a veteran hospitaller, whispered that it wrapped around the crowd like a mother's embrace. Even the procession organizers, who knew every lamp and reflection, were stunned. "This was not from us," one said. "It was alive." I thought, this must be Our Lady walking with us. At that moment, Pierre collapsed into his father's arms. Panic turned to awe as the boy opened radiant eyes and whispered, "Mama, Papa, I'm healed." The lady in white told me Dr. Isabelle Fournier, his oncologist, rushed forward. The child she had examined hours earlier, weak, pale, with swollen lymph nodes, now had color, vitality, and no trace of disease. "In 15 years of treating cancer," she wrote, "I have never seen anything like it." The golden light continued as news spread through the crowd. Children raised candles higher, the elderly fell to their knees, and the hymn echoed against the mountains with new force. Volunteers and doctors wept openly, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. The Moreau family clung together, sobbing with gratitude, as their son stood free of the illness that had defined their lives. But Pierre was solid, real, vibrant in ways she hadn't seen since before his diagnosis. His breathing was strong and steady. His color was perfect. When he looked at her, it was with the clear, intelligent gaze of a healthy child, not the glazed look of someone struggling with illness and medication. Within days, extensive tests at hospitals in Tarbes and Lyon would confirm what their hearts already knew, but their minds struggled to accept. Blood work that had shown elevated white cell counts and other markers of active leukemia now came back completely normal. Bone marrow biopsies that had previously shown diseased cells now showed healthy tissue. CT scans that had revealed enlarged lymph nodes now showed no abnormalities whatsoever. Dr. Henri Blanchard, the chief of pediatric hematology-oncology at Lyon's Premier Children's Hospital and Pierre's primary physician for 2 years, would spend weeks reviewing and re-reviewing the test results. In his final report, he wrote with characteristic medical caution but unmistakable wonder, "The patient's condition has undergone a transformation that cannot be explained by any known medical process. Complete spontaneous remission of this type, occurring this rapidly, is not documented in medical literature. We are compelled to acknowledge that we are confronting something beyond our current scientific understanding. But the night held yet one more grace, one more impossible gift that would complete the trifold miracle of September 17th, 2025. Among the crowd of pilgrims, maintaining a reverent distance from the central action, but observing everything with the trained eye of someone who had dedicated his life to service, stood Fra Antoine Marie de la Croix, a 38-year-old Franciscan friar from Marseille. From Antoine Marie presented a study in contradiction. Deeply spiritual, yet intensely practical. Gentle in manner, yet strong in conviction. Someone who had learned to transform personal suffering into a tool for serving others. 15 years earlier, a motorcycle accident on a rain-slicked road outside Marseille had shattered his right leg and damaged his sciatic nerve so severely that 3 different orthopedic surgeons had delivered the same devastating verdict. He would never walk normally again. Years of rehabilitation had left him with a pronounced limp and constant, grinding pain that shot down his leg with every step. The thick wooden cane he carried was not merely an aid, but a necessity. Without it, he would have been confined to a wheelchair. Yet Fra Antoine Marie had chosen to see his disability not as a limitation, but as a calling. Unlike many who journeyed to Lourdes seeking personal healing, he had come as a companion to others, devoting himself to caring for disabled pilgrims who needed assistance with their own spiritual journeys. His group that week included men and women in wheelchairs, children who were blind or deaf, adults living with various forms of paralysis, people whom society often overlooked but who, in Fra Antoine Marie's eyes, were precious souls deserving of dignity, care, and the chance to encounter the divine. He had spent the day helping people in and out of wheelchairs, guiding them to the baths, ensuring they had good positions for viewing the processions, all while managing his own considerable pain with characteristic stoicism. On the morning following the torchlight procession, as news of the previous night's miracles continued to ripple through the sanctuary, Fra Antoine Marie gathered his group before the grotto for their daily prayer. They had chosen to pray the sorrowful mysteries that morning, finding in Christ's Passion a reflection of their own daily struggles with physical limitation and pain. The friar stood with his customary dignity, leaning on his wooden cane, his face showing the serenity of someone who had long ago learned to transform suffering into spiritual strength. Around him, his companions, some in wheelchairs, others with various disabilities, formed a circle of quiet devotion. Their voices, some strong, others whispered, began the familiar rhythm of the Rosary. The first sorrowful mystery, Fra Antoine Marie announced in his clear, steady voice. The agony in the garden. The words seemed to echo off the grotto walls, mixing with the constant trickle of the spring water that had flowed there since Saint Bernadette's time. As they progressed through the prayers, moving from Christ's agony to his scourging, from the crowning with thorns to the carrying of the cross, Fra Antoine Marie felt a familiar peace settling over him. This was his element, leading prayer, serving others, finding meaning in the midst of suffering. His own pain, as always, was present but manageable, a constant companion he had learned to acknowledge without allowing it to dominate. But when they reached the 5th mystery, the crucifixion, something extraordinary began to happen. As his companions recited, Hail Mary, full of grace, Fra Antoine Marie felt an intense warmth surge through his injured leg. This was not the familiar sensation of circulation returning to a limb that had gone to sleep, nor was it the burning ache he had grown accustomed to over 15 years. This was something entirely different, a living fire that pulsed gently, steadily, climbing from his foot through his ankle, up his calf, and into his thigh. For years, that leg had been largely numb below the knee, the damaged nerves unable to transmit normal sensation. He had grown accustomed to the strange disconnect of dragging what felt like dead weight with each step. Now, suddenly, the limb felt vibrantly alive, as if electricity were flowing through pathways that had been dead for 15 years. Claire Rousseau, a volunteer nurse from Belgium who had been praying beside him throughout the week, noticed the change first. She had grown fond of the gentle friar who worked so tirelessly for others while managing his own considerable disability. Now she watched in amazement as his posture began to shift, his grip on the wooden cane loosening, his shoulders straightening in ways she had never seen before. Tears welled in her eyes as she saw the transformation occurring before her. From Antoine Marie's face, normally composed and serene, was now streaked with tears of wonder. His free hand trembled as he touched his injured leg, feeling sensation return to areas that had been numb for over a decade. As the group reached the words, "Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death," Fra Antoine Marie felt the warmth reach its peak. In that moment, with a gesture that seemed to surprise even him, he let his wooden cane slip from his fingers. The sound of it clattering against the stone was sharp in the morning air, causing his companions to look up from their prayers. What they saw took their breath away. For 15 years, they had watched their beloved friar shuffle forward with painful, awkward steps, always favoring his damaged leg, always dependent on his cane for balance and support. Now he stood perfectly straight, weight evenly distributed on both legs, his face radiant with tears of joy and disbelief. Without hesitation, without the cautious testing of weight that had marked his movement for 15 years, Fra Antoine Marie took a step forward. Then another. His stride was steady, confident, natural, as if his body had never known the trauma of that long-ago accident. The disabled pilgrims he had been serving throughout the week broke into applause, their joy for his healing mixing with their own hopes for grace. Some, confined to wheelchairs, raised their hands in praise. Others began to sing the Magnificat, their voices trembling with awe and gratitude. Those who could stand rose to their feet, creating a spontaneous celebration of divine mercy. From Antoine Marie walked the short distance to the grotto itself and fell to his knees before the rock where Saint Bernadette had knelt so many times before. His hands lifted to the sky and his voice rang out clear and strong. Merci Notre Dame. Thank you. Blessed be God forever. Sister Mary Paul, who had co-led the pilgrimage for disabled visitors and had worked closely with Fra Antoine Marie all week, later recalled the moment with tears still fresh in her eyes. Seeing him walk freely was like watching a door to heaven open before us. We all felt lifted, even those of us who remained in our wheelchairs or with our own limitations. His healing became ours in ways I cannot fully explain. It was as if grace had touched not just his body, but all of our souls. Dr. Jean-Luc Vanet, a retired neurologist who had volunteered with medical services at Lourdes for over a decade and knew Fra Antoine Marie's case history intimately, witnessed the entire scene from a distance. He had reviewed the friar's medical records, had consulted on similar cases of sciatic nerve damage, and had long considered such extensive damage to be irreversible. Yet here was the same man he had seen struggling with mobility just the day before, now climbing the steps to the grotto without assistance, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had never known injury. Dr. Vanet approached carefully, his medical training demanding verification of what his eyes were telling him. Within hours, he had arranged for preliminary examinations at the medical bureau. Within days, more extensive testing at Marseille Hospital would confirm what seemed impossible. Nerve pathways that had been severed and destroyed were somehow fully restored. Sensation had returned to areas that had been numb for 15 years. Muscle strength had been restored to levels consistent with a healthy adult male. The medical report, filed 3 weeks later, concluded with words that challenged everything Dr. Vanet thought he understood about neurology. The patient presents with complete restoration of neurological function in areas previously documented as permanently damaged. This degree of nerve regeneration, occurring spontaneously and instantly, represents a phenomenon beyond current medical explanation. But for Fra Antoine Marie himself, the physical healing was only the beginning of a deeper transformation. In the days that followed, as he walked freely through the sanctuary where he had served for so many years, he began to understand that his healing was not merely personal. It was a sign, a calling to deeper service. My handicap had taught me compassion, he told his fellow friars upon returning to Marseille. It forced me to slow down, to understand suffering from the inside, to serve others not from a position of strength, but from shared weakness. Now my healing teaches me to serve with renewed vigor, but never to forget the lessons learned in limitation. Both were gifts. Both were grace. 3 different people. 3 different ailments that medicine had declared incurable or irreversible. 3 impossible healings that would be documented, investigated, and celebrated. Yet threading through all 3 stories like a golden cord was a single, unbreakable strand. The Rosary. Marie Claire's sudden freedom from rheumatoid arthritis had come during the joyful mysteries, as hundreds of voices recited the ancient prayers together. Pierre's miraculous recovery from leukemia had unfolded as 30,000 pilgrims sang Ave Maria with candles raised to heaven. From Antoine Marie's restoration from permanent nerve damage had occurred during the sorrowful mysteries while meditating on Christ's crucifixion with his small community of disabled pilgrims. Different times, different places, different circumstances, but the same rhythm of prayer, the same chain of beads linking earth to heaven, the same trust in the maternal intercession of Mary. It was as if the Mother of God had chosen to underline a fundamental truth, that the simple, repetitive prayer of the Rosary remains her privileged channel for pouring grace into human suffering. To understand what happened in September 2025, one must journey back more than a century and a half to the chilly February of 1858, when a poor 14-year-old girl named Bernadette Soubirous gathered firewood along the banks of the Gave River. In the hollow of Massabiel's rock, she saw what she would later describe as a lady clothed in white, with a yellow sash and a blue belt, and a yellow rose on each foot. That vision, simple yet radiant, began a chain of 18 apparitions that would transform not only Bernadette's life, but the spiritual landscape of the Catholic world forever. The lady, who would eventually identify herself as the Immaculate Conception, a title that confirmed the Church's recent dogmatic declaration, asked for prayer, penance, and the construction of a chapel. She told the frightened but trusting girl to drink from a spring that at first produced only muddy water when Bernadette scraped at the earth with her bare hands. From that day to this, that spring has never ceased to flow, producing thousands of gallons of pure water daily. The water of Lourdes contains no special chemicals, no unique healing agents science can measure. Analyses show it to be ordinary spring water, yet faith has made it extraordinary, a sign that God works through the most common elements of creation. From the late 19th century, tens of thousands came each year with their sick and suffering, seeking hope in this remote corner of France. To guard against exaggeration, the Church established a medical bureau in 1883. The standards for declaring a miracle were strict. The healing must be sudden, complete, lasting, and scientifically inexplicable. Only 72 healings have been officially recognized out of millions of pilgrims, but each has stood as a challenge to materialist explanations and a beacon of faith. The events of September 2025 fit seamlessly into this tradition. Marie Claire's sudden release from arthritis echoed earlier accounts of frozen limbs becoming supple. Pierre's cure recalled stories of blind children receiving sight. From Antoine Marie's restored leg fit the long line of veterans and accident victims healed where medicine had failed. Even the imagery matched. Bernadette saw a lady radiant as the sun, while pilgrims in 2025 witnessed a golden glow above the basilica. Bernadette uncovered a spring with her hands. Modern pilgrims still bathe in that same water. At the heart of Lourdes, then and now, is the Rosary. Bernadette described how the lady silently fingered her beads. In 2025, miracles again unfolded during Rosary prayer. What unites 1858 and 2025 is not spectacle, but constancy. The same grotto, the same prayer, the same maternal tenderness of Mary. Each generation is invited to bring its wounds, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, into that stream of grace. The Rosary, often misunderstood as mindless repetition, reveals itself as symphony. Each Hail Mary is a drop of water. Together, they form a river that moves mountains and opens heaven. This prayer binds earth to heaven, carrying human cries into Mary's hands. At Lourdes, pilgrims discovered that when thousands prayed together, doubts dissolved, voices grew stronger, and grace descended. The timing of the 2025 healings underscored the point. They occurred at the climax of communal prayer. The joyful mysteries, the sorrowful mysteries, the torchlight procession. It was as if Mary herself marked these moments to show that when her children pray in unity, the veil between heaven and earth grows thin. For many, the Rosary was transformed from routine into living power. Children clutched beads with new fervor. Teenagers found themselves unexpectedly moved. Adults rediscovered long-forgotten faith. And doctors whispered prayers they had not said in years. Even skeptics admitted something beyond explanation had touched them. The deepest meaning of the miracles lay not only in the cures themselves, but in what followed. Lives renewed, faith strengthened, grace shared. A miracle is complete not at the moment of healing, but when the healed life becomes a source of hope for others. Marie-Claire Dubois, suddenly free after 15 years of twisted joints and unrelenting pain, faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could retreat into the comfortable privacy of her miraculous healing, enjoying the simple pleasures she had been denied for so long. Walking without pain, sleeping through the night, performing daily tasks without assistance. Instead, she chose the more difficult path of service. Within a week of returning to Lille, while still marveling at her restored mobility, Marie-Claire began volunteering at her parish's outreach program for elderly and disabled community members. The irony was not lost on her. She who had so recently been among those needing care was now among those providing it. But perhaps that very experience of vulnerability made her uniquely qualified to serve others facing similar struggles. Those who had previously looked upon her with pity, who had opened doors for her arthritic hands and carried her packages with her damaged joints, now watched in amazement as she pushed wheelchairs with steady arms, carried meal trays without, trembling, and most importantly, listened with the deep compassion that only someone who has walked through the valley of prolonged suffering can offer. I once believed that my pain would last until my final breath, she told the elderly residents of the local care facility where she now volunteered 3 days a week. I had resigned myself to counting my remaining days in pills and sleepless nights. But Our Lady gave me back my hands and feet, not for my own comfort, but so I could use them to serve you. Every step I take without pain is a prayer of thanksgiving, and every task I can perform for others is a way of sharing the miracle I received. Her transformation became a source of wonder and inspiration for her entire parish community. Father Michel Dubois, the elderly priest who had counseled her through her darkest years of suffering, watched with tears of joy as the woman who had once struggled to kneel for prayer now spent hours on her knees scrubbing floors at the community center, organizing food drives for families in need, and leading rosary groups for other chronically ill parishioners. Marie-Claire has become living proof that miracles are not meant to end with the person who receives them, Father Dubois observed during his Sunday homily a month after her healing. She could have chosen to simply enjoy her restored health in private. Instead, she has made her healing a gift to our entire community. Her miracle has multiplied into countless smaller miracles of service, compassion, and hope. Pierre Moreau's story carried a different kind of transformation. The bold enthusiasm of youth channeled into newfound purpose. The 12-year-old boy, who had whispered prayers from a hospital bed, who had endured countless needle sticks and chemotherapy sessions with remarkable courage, now spoke with the conviction of someone who had been entrusted with a sacred mission. His parents, Jean-Baptiste and Sylvie, initially worried that the trauma of his illness might have lasting psychological effects, that the sudden transition from life-threatening disease to perfect health might be difficult for a child to process. Instead, they discovered that Pierre seemed to understand his healing not as an escape from suffering, but as a call to help others who were still trapped in similar battles. "The lady told me something else when she healed me," Pierre confided to his parents one evening as they sat together in their living room, a scene that would have been impossible just weeks earlier, when Pierre's energy had been too depleted for such simple family moments. "She said I needed to help other sick children when I grow up. She said that's why she made me well, not just for me, but for all the kids who are still waiting for their miracles." At school, Pierre became an unlikely apostle of hope among his classmates. Children who had been uncomfortable around his illness, who had struggled to understand why someone so young had to face such adult realities, now gathered around him with fascination and genuine affection as he shared his story. He spoke with simple directness about prayer, about faith, about the reality of divine intervention, concepts that might have seemed abstract or outdated to modern children, but which carried undeniable weight coming from someone who had experienced them firsthand. His teachers, initially concerned about how to reintegrate a child who had missed so much school due to treatment, found instead that Pierre brought a unique perspective to their classroom. When studying science, he spoke knowledgeably about cellular biology and the human immune system, knowledge gained not from textbooks, but from living with leukemia. When discussing literature or history, he demonstrated a depth of understanding about suffering, hope, and resilience that seemed far beyond his years. Most remarkably, Pierre began expressing a clear sense of his future vocation. He drew detailed pictures of himself as a doctor, specifically as a pediatric oncologist. He researched medical schools and began asking his parents about what subjects he should focus on to prepare for a career in medicine. His former physicians, when they learned of his aspirations, were deeply moved by his desire to give back to the field that had saved his life, and which had proved inadequate until divine intervention succeeded where medical science had reached its limits. Dr. Isabelle Fournier, the pediatric oncologist who had witnessed Pierre's healing firsthand, began meeting with him monthly, not as doctor and patient, but as mentor and protege. She provided him with age-appropriate books about medicine, arranged visits to pediatric wards where he could encourage other sick children, and helped him understand the scientific aspects of his former disease in ways that enhanced rather than diminished his faith in the miracle that had saved him. Pierre possesses something that cannot be taught in medical school, Doctor. Fournier reflected. He has credibility with sick children that no healthy doctor can ever have. When he tells a child that miracles are real, that prayers matter, that healing is possible, they believe him in ways they might not believe me. His future career in medicine, if he pursues it, will be built on a foundation that combines the best of scientific training with first-hand experience of divine intervention. Pierre's influence extended beyond his immediate circle. The Association Espérance Cancer, the organization that had arranged his pilgrimage to Lourdes, invited him to speak at their annual conference for families affected by childhood cancer. Standing before an audience of parents whose children were still fighting for their lives, Pierre spoke with remarkable composure about his experience. "I know how scared you are," he told the gathering, his young voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "I know how tired you get from all the treatments and all the worrying, but I want you to know that the Lady in White sees every single one of you kids. She knows their names and she knows how much they hurt. Sometimes she heals them right away like she did for me. Sometimes she gives them strength to keep fighting. But she never, ever forgets about them. And she never wants you to stop praying, because your prayers are like little lights that help her find your children in the darkness." There was not a dry eye in the auditorium when Pierre finished speaking. Parents who had been carrying unbearable burdens of fear and helplessness found themselves genuinely comforted by the words of a child who had walked through their nightmare and emerged not just alive, but transformed. Several families approached Pierre and his parents afterward, asking if they could exchange contact information, wanting to maintain connection with someone who represented such tangible hope for their own situations. For Fra Antoine-Marie de la Croix, the healing of his damaged leg marked not the end of his ministry to disabled individuals, but its profound renewal and expansion. The Franciscan Friar, now free from the limp that had defined his physical existence for 15 years, discovered that his healing had opened doors to service he had never imagined possible. With his restored mobility, Fra Antoine-Marie could now travel more extensively, visiting remote communities and isolated individuals who had previously been beyond his reach. He organized monthly pilgrimages to various Marian shrines throughout France, specifically designed for people with disabilities who might not otherwise have the opportunity or support to make such journeys. His personal experience of both limitation and liberation gave him unique credibility and compassion in working with individuals facing their own physical challenges. "My handicap taught me patience, humility, and dependence on God, he explained to his fellow Franciscans during a community meeting shortly after his return from Lourdes. Those were precious gifts that I would not trade for anything. Now my healing teaches me that no limitation is permanent in God's eyes, and that gives me renewed energy to help others discover the same hope. Both experiences, the suffering and the healing, were necessary parts of my formation as a priest and as a servant of God's people. From Antoine Marie's approach to ministry became increasingly dynamic and creative. He established a network of support groups in parishes throughout the Marseille diocese, specifically for individuals dealing with chronic illness or disability. These groups met monthly for prayer, mutual encouragement, and practical assistance with daily challenges. His own story of transformation provided a foundation of hope that sustained these communities through their darkest moments. More significantly, he began developing a retreat program that combined traditional spiritual exercises with practical discussions about finding meaning and purpose in the midst of physical limitation. These retreats, held at various monasteries and retreat centers throughout France, attracted participants from across Europe, people seeking not just healing for their bodies, but peace for their souls and direction for their lives. Dr. Jean-Luc Vanet, the neurologist who had documented Fra Antoine Marie's healing, became one of the retreat program's strongest supporters. Despite his scientific background and natural skepticism about supernatural claims, Dr. Vanet found himself deeply impressed by the friar's holistic approach to human suffering. What Fra Antoine Marie offers goes far beyond what medical science can provide, Dr. Vanet observed. We can treat symptoms, manage pain, and sometimes repair damage. But we cannot give meaning to suffering, hope in the midst of despair, or purpose in the face of limitation. His retreats accomplish something that no pharmaceutical intervention or surgical procedure can achieve. They help people discover that their lives have value and purpose regardless of their physical condition. The friar's words grew sharper and more urgent as his story spread. My healing is not for me alone, he repeated. It is a sign that nothing, no wound, no handicap, no diagnosis is outside God's reach. Do not lose hope. God specializes in impossible situations. Because he spoke from experience of both despair and miraculous restoration, Fra Antoine Marie's message resonated deeply with the young, the ill, and the disabled. Veterans with injuries, children with genetic conditions, and adults facing incurable diseases saw in him not mere optimism, but living proof that hope was justified. The ripple effects of the 3 September 2025 healings spread across Europe. Pilgrims carried testimonies home, parishes revived the Rosary, and hospital chaplains reported renewed interest in spiritual care. Doctors themselves wrestled with what they had seen. Dr. Philippe Martin, the rheumatologist who had witnessed Marie Claire's transformation, admitted, "I can no longer pretend patients are just machines. They are souls as well as bodies." Pediatric oncologist Dr. Isabelle Fournier, who examined Pierre, created new hospital programs integrating medical treatment with spiritual and emotional support, inspired by his healing. Even skeptical Professor Henri Blanchard confessed he could not dismiss what had happened. I am not prepared to call it a miracle, but I cannot call it coincidence either. The Catholic community responded with joy and devotion. Pilgrimages increased, rosary sales soared, and many lukewarm believers rediscovered their faith. The 3 central figures became reluctant symbols. Marie Claire served quietly among the elderly. Pierre spoke with childlike openness to encourage others, and Fra Antoine Marie embraced his role as public witness across Europe. His constant refrain, "Hope is never misplaced. Prayer is never wasted." If one image captured that week, it was the sight of 30,000 candles swaying in unison during the torchlight procession, a fragile river of light that no darkness could extinguish. When Pierre declared his healing beneath the golden glow above the basilica, something transcendent occurred. Individuals from dozens of nations became one body, one voice, one prayer. In that unity, private sorrows dissolved into communal grace. Marie Claire's healing was celebrated as if by family. Pierre's cure brought tears, as if he were every pilgrim's child. From Antoine Marie's discarded cane became victory for all who suffered. None of the miracles belonged to one person. Each was a gift for the entire church. Long after the procession ended, people lingered in prayer, realizing anew what Bernadette had first taught. Miracles are not private possessions, but communal signs of divine love. The healings of Marie-Claire, Pierre, and Fray Antoine-Marie were sparks in a constellation of grace, proof that Mary still walks with her children, listening, interceding, and opening hearts to her Son. Lourdes 2025 was not simply about 3 impossible cures. It became a reminder that heaven is never far, that the Rosary remains a privileged path of grace, and that the true miracle is not only the healing of bodies, but the transformation of souls into lives of service and faith, and faith, and faith, and faith, and faith, and faith, and faith.